think it's time to discuss your philosophy of drug use as it relates to artistic endeavor.
Sup? I'm reliably informed that I'm terrible at pimping my stuff, so here I am, pimping my stuff. You can buy most of the shit that I make over at post-mort.com. Hope to see you there.
So, a while back now, a couple of weeks, you've probably seen the review, I bought Twilight 2000, the newest edition from Free League. And since then, and since the invasion of Ukraine, owning that game has felt a bit like a millstone around my neck. I mean, I mostly bought it for the review and for the collection, but even so, I like to at least think I might play some of these games at some point. And while Russia's invasion of the Ukraine provides a credible jumping off point for World War III, something that should worry us all and makes the game feel more relevant, it also makes it feel a lot more uncomfortable dealing with real life events and fighting Russians. So I've been casting about looking for something to potentially do with the game that isn't quite so cringe and squirm inducing and uncomfortable. And what occurred to me the most was the series Invasion 1999 or Savage from the comic 2000 AD. 2000 AD hasn't been so good lately, unfortunately, but one of the rare more recent-ish throwbacks, I guess, though we're going back longer than I care to remember, was Savage by Pat Mills. So in the comic book, which was originally written in the late 70s and then revived in the 2000s, in the comic book, England is invaded in 1999 by the Volgans, which is a military dictatorship that took over the former USSR. Basically, glasnost, perestroika, all of that led to a military coup and the emergence of another Stalin-esque sort of regime in the former USSR. And after a fairly weak far-left government took over the UK, it's implied that it's under a Prime Minister, Ken Livingstone, and a party called True Labour. Basically, Britain was left defenceless because there was nuclear disarmament and the Americans were thrown off Britain. Then massive new reserves of North Sea oil were discovered. Not long after, the Volgan Republic launches a massive attack, having come to a behind-the-scenes deal with the Americans to divide the world up into spheres of influence, smashes through Western Europe, takes over Britain. Not particularly credible, but science fiction. So it's a lightning attack, a blitzkrieg, a couple of nuclear weapons were used on the Midlands, no great loss, sorry. And the USA agreed to stay out of the fight. The whole Monroe Doctrine, US is insular, independent, doesn't need anybody else, that whole sort of thing. So on January 1st, 6 o'clock in the morning, the Volgs nuke the Midlands. The royal family legs it to Canada. The war lasts about 8 hours. And while they were a bit more on the nose with Ken Livingstone, they replaced Margaret Thatcher with a stand-in called Lady Shirley Brown, who was executed on the steps of St. Paul's. I mean, following this invasion, one man, a lorry driver, appropriately enough today, called Bill Savage, takes up his shotgun from the ruins of his house where his family were killed and starts fighting back, falling in with various resistance elements and with covert support from the Commonwealth, most of Canada, and the CIA. Now, the original comic, it's very much of its time. It's more when 2000 AD was angled at kids, even though it's pretty brutal. It's very jingoistic, and it harks back to an era of 2000 AD where it was much more working class, much more. I don't know quite how to describe it, but it was very much a thing of the working class and of those kind of rebellious kids who would sneakily watch horror films and things at night when their parents were asleep, that sort of thing. Shocking, but only up to a certain line, not over the line of its predecessor comic Action, which was basically cancelled in the day for being violent and transgressive and nasty. 2000 AD learned, I think, from Action and stopped just short of being quite so transgressive and nasty, but right up to the point. And Invasion 1999 was not really any different. And a lot of it is very much like the kind of war comics that were still popular in the 70s and 80s, glorifying Britain's role in World War II. Unusually for 2000 AD, which has also traditionally been extremely left-wing in its outlook, Bill Savage is much more of a right-wing working class sort of hero, the kind of Thatcherite, by my own council house sort of type, which is interesting because it's so out of character for the way 2000 AD has normally been. It's normally been the comic of rebels, of punks. It has dealt with interesting issues around paganism and politics and so on, very much from a left-wing perspective. But here we have a sort of the earth right-wing, up to a point, working-class hero fighting back against a foreign invasion. So on the surface of it, it seems very jingoistic and quite right-wing and patriotic and nationalist and all the rest of it. And certainly the original Invasion 1999 is more like that. Whereas the later comic, Savage, is much more mature, much more satirical, much more cynical, and was inspired very much by what was going on in the news at the time, the American occupation of Afghanistan, the other of various American occupations and foreign wars and so on. The kind of extraordinary rendition and torture that was going on was kind of taken out of the hands of the Americans in the real world and transposed onto the Volgan Republic in the comic world, and setting the Brits as the people who are being occupied, tortured, spied on, experimented on, all of that kind of thing. So it used the lens of what was once a very sort of jingoistic, rah-rah, Cold War sort of fight, and used it, the way comics used to use, stories of all kinds used to use allegory and so on to make comments about the real world without doing so directly. Yeah, a lot of that, and it did it very, very well, I think. As time went on, more and more science fiction elements were wound into Savage, and while the early ones were things like metal storm technology, crowd control energy weapons, drones, and so on, it eventually did jump the shark with things like teleportation technology and fully autonomous robots and so on. But up until that point, it was a very grounded, very realistic, very gritty feeling sort of comic that really made you feel the occupation. No doubt memories of World War II coming down from grandfather to father to son through the various people that have worked on the comic all the time, and all the heritage of those war comics I mentioned before. But it's a very good comic series. Can be a bit difficult to find online, but I'm sure you'll find your ways and means. It's well worth a read, but it's also a good way to redeem games like Twilight 2000. While the current edition will not satisfy a lot of the old fans of that game, not being as gritty, not being as technical, for running this kind of resistance campaign or any military-oriented small unit type game, it certainly works. And Savage, I think, gives us a model of how to take inspiration from the news and turn it into good stories for games and campaigns. You can look at what's going on in the world militarily, however horrible it might be, and you can transpose that into your game setting and use it to make commentary on, to satirize what's going on. And there's always inspiration in the news. Technology as well. All you have to do is look at the technology section of the news, find some new breakthrough or something, amp it up a little bit, and then apply it to your game setting. This is the way a lot of people work. They just take inspiration from what's around them, twist it a bit, combine it, change it, and then put it into what they're working on. And commentary is as valid in role-playing games as it is anywhere else. So, a useful way to redeem the game and a useful model from Savage for how we can use inspiration from the real world to inform our games. Zang.
Do you like t-shirts?
Yeah, boy!
Do you like games?
Certainly.
Are you perhaps a little bit kinky?
Yes, quite.
Then buy one of our B&D t-shirts at Teespring. Teespring.com/stores/postmortem-studios. You want to be cool, don't you?
Does the word duh mean anything to you?